The trial of 58-year-old Richard Satchwell of Grattan Street, Youghal in County Cork for the murder of his wife Tina at the same address in March of 2017 continues at the Central Criminal Court in Dublin. He has entered a not guilty plea. I'm joined by our Southern reporter Jamie O'Hara. Jamie, good morning.
Good morning, Pat.
Now, he gave a lot of interviews to the Gardaí, or was interviewed several times, so the videos of the second and third interviews from his second arrest in October 2023 were played to the jury yesterday. And in the last video, Gardaí put it to Satchwell that Tina's death appeared premeditated. What did they hear?
That's right, Pat. Detective Sergeant David Noonan, he opens the interview on the 12th of October by telling Richard Satchwell that he wants to go through some clarifications from the first interview. So Mr. Satchwell is asked to describe Tina, and he says, physically perfect. And then he's asked to describe her in more detail, and he describes her slim with a size 10 waist. He says what size trousers she wore and her weight, which he said was 8 or 8.5 stone, and then her shoe size. And Sergeant Noonan asks him about two robes and the belts of the robes, and Mr. Satchwell says that Tina would wash the robes and just take another of the belts from her collection of robes, essentially, Pat, mixing and matching the belt to the robe. He said Tina would buy a robe that was a bigger size and then take a belt from an even bigger robe. Now, if I skip ahead very briefly to the final moments of the last video, which were heard at the end yesterday, it's put to Richard Satchwell that Tina's death was premeditated, and he says, I am just going to say this once more. It was not premeditated. I am sitting here today telling you that.
Now, then he's asked for some details about having previously mentioned that he cut the belt after Tina had died.
Yeah, so he said he had cut the belt of the robe with a pair of nail scissors, and he said, I wanted her arm around me, and that the belt was stopping him from doing so. He said, I wasn't thinking straight, and that's the kind of situation that no one wants to find themselves in. And he says he is trying to remember the incident as best as he can.
And his memory of the incident forms a large part of the discussion in that second interview.
Very much so, Pat. Richard Satchwell says everything was like it was happening in a film you can't rewind. And he says he can't go into detail. And he says this several times. He says he didn't try to make it look like something it wasn't, and didn't try to cover up anything by removing anything from Tina's body. And then Sergeant Noonan puts it to him. For the last 6 years, you haven't been telling the truth, and came in the other day and didn't tell the truth. And now you have told me that from the day Tina was murdered and stopped breathing, you were with her and held her for hours, that you picked her up and put her on the couch and then into the freezer in the shed that wasn't turned on. And then he says, the sergeant says, it doesn't make sense to him that Richard Satchwell can't tell him these details that he's looking for. Then there is a discussion about the burial where Richard Satchwell says burying Tina was the final goodbye. And he says, I wanted her with me. I know she was dead. I would talk to her. Essentially like someone would talk to someone when they visit a graveyard. And then Sergeant Noonan questions why there's so much specific details from the day before. That's the 19th of March 2017. So that's Carricktool car boot sale and the journey home and getting the Apache pizza. And then says that Richard Satchwell is excluding the most significant thing and that there is no reasonable explanation for him to do that unless there was something else to hide. And Mr. Satchwell says, I'm sorry, I can't recall every single detail. And then he says he was operating on automatic and was most concerned with preventing himself being stabbed with the chisel. And then the sergeant says, ultimately, from the description Richard Satchwell has given of the incident, that the sergeant can't see how Tina died, and it doesn't make sense unless there is another explanation. And then when asked to show the sergeant what happened after Tina flew at him with the chisel, Mr. Satchwell responds, I can't. He says, I'm trying here, I'm not perfect. And then he says he can only go on the way it was for him from his experience. And he's asked again, Pat, to demonstrate it, and he says, I can't.
And the sergeant tells Satchwell there's a massive question mark over what he's saying.
Yes, and Richard Satchwell then says, in response to that, it feels to me like you are trying to push me into saying something just to please you. Sergeant Noonan says, no one could just die like that. Richard Satchwell says, I've said it the way it was for me. And then he also says that he doesn't want to go down the road of no comment as answers. He said, I would like to know why my life fell apart in 10 seconds. He said he defended himself, but he wasn't taking details at the time. And at a certain point, he wasn't looking at Tina's face or her clothing. He was looking at the chisel. And then he's asked to describe the belt on her neck and the detail of that. Richard Satchwell says, I can't, honestly, I can't. He says, I put my hands up. I'm not looking for sympathy. I'm not looking for a let off. Now I am here and I'm doing the best I can. And after that, Pat, he says, I'm sick of living behind a mask.
Now, Richard Satchwell is specifically asked whether the belt caused the death of his wife, Tina.
Yes, the sergeant asked him if the belt and you holding it caused her death. And the reply, I honestly can't say for certain, but for me, yeah. He then says he could not give Sergeant Noonan the 100% on the ball details. He said he didn't take note of the belt when he was holding it at the time and was only focused on the chisel. The sergeant puts it to Mr. Satchwell again that what he is saying doesn't make sense. Richard Satchwell then says, I'm no expert. I'm telling from my experience and the way I experienced it. He said 100 experts could say he is wrong, but that's the way he has seen it. And then he says the sergeant has a job to do and then says, and no disrespect, but that job is to, quote, bury me. And the sergeant responds by saying that his job is to establish the truth. Then he's asked about an email, Pat, he sent on 10:42 a.m. on the 20th of March 2017. And Richard Satchwell finishes the sergeant's sentence by saying, to the Monkey Organisation. He said he sent that email to keep everything running, essentially, to save face. Said the emails from the organisation were borderline threatening.
And then a third interview was played to the jury.
That's right. This is an interview from the 13th of October 2023, and it's conducted by Detective Noel McSweeney. Richard Satchwell tells Detective McSweeney that after hearing of the preservation on some of Tina's body when it was discovered, that he did kind of make her comfortable, was his quote. He described living two lives, one during the day when he's at work and doing his deliveries, and the other when he got home and was deflated in the house. He said, I was living the life of a homeless person with a roof over my head. He said he had no motivation to do anything, including cleaning the house. He's then asked about something he said at the start of the interview, where he said he had put Tina in a sleeping position in the hole under the stairs. And then he says he cannot say it happened or whether it was a figment of his imagination, but what had come to him was that she was in the hole in a sleeping position, and he doesn't know essentially whether it's from the discussion or tiredness or reality. And then the jury heard from the video that he can't remember getting in or out of the hole under the stairs, but his hands, his elbows, and his arms were grazed and cut, he said.
Now, he's asked about time again.
Yeah, that's right, Pat. He says he doesn't know. He's asked to describe the hole, which he says is just a hole. And then he's asked, how long did it take to dig? His reply is he can't give Gardaí a timeline. It was light when he started, it was dark when he finished, and he wasn't in the right frame of mind. And then he's asked about his frame of mind. What is your frame of mind, or what was your frame of mind? And he says, scared, sorrowful, and ashamed. Then he's asked about the quality of his life and how it has been altered after Tina was gone. And he said his quality of life was non-existent. He said, I'm not inhuman. I have a conscience. I still dream of Tina. I haven't lost the desire to be with her.
He's asked about the €26,000 he said that Tina had taken. What did the jury hear in relation to that?
Yeah, in terms of the money, Detective McSweeney puts it to Richard Satchwell. There was no money. He replies, no. Then she says, that was a lie. He replies, yeah. There's also a further discussion about what is the truth, and he says, I've got nothing to gain and nothing to lose anymore. He says he can't be specific on times, but he spent the whole night on the floor holding Tina's body in his arms and was there until the next morning, which was the Tuesday. Detective McSweeney puts it to him that he is a 6'2" man, he's strong, and says she is not a small woman, but if she went at him with a weapon, she would be fearful of him taking it off her. And then he replies that the smallest person can be stronger than a big person, and says he just reacted in fear or defense with the intention of keeping that chisel away. He said there was no intent or premeditation. And then it's put to him that he's changing the narrative since Tina's body was found, and he's not telling the truth. We're still not getting the full truth, is what is said to him. And his reply is that he's carried this for the best part of 7 years and is not trying to cover up, embellish. But the trial at the Central Criminal Court in Dublin, Pat, continues today.